really interesting because my mom is right here, and she's probably the only person, on the planet who can corroborate my story, who was there when this happened. But let me just tell you guys this. No matter what you may believe, no matter how you may try to convince your friends of something, about religion or about the Bible or about God, there's one thing that no one can argue with you about. You know what it is? Your story. No one can refute what happened to you, right? See what I'm saying? Because it's your experience. Somebody says, I felt God's presence in this moment and it changed me. Nobody can look at you and go, yeah, you did. See what I'm saying? There's something very powerful about your story. And that's one of the most amazing things about a relationship with God. It changes you. And sometimes people can't even explain how it did, but they know it did. What does the Bible say about the disciples? One minute they're cowering, bozos, running to distance themselves, right, from Jesus and hiding in fear. And the next minute, they're bold. And they're out standing in the streets and preaching and sharing what happened, right? What was it? What happened? God changed them. And the other people that knew them, the religious leaders of the day were like, weren't these the guys? Aren't these those simple, ignorant, uneducated fishermen that were hanging around with Jesus, the one we crucified, right? Remember? And all of them were like, what happened to these guys? They're talking way above their means, what we would expect from them. And I think there's even a passage in the scripture that says, and they determined that they had been with Jesus. Isn't that cool? That they deduced that that was what happened to them. That they had been changed somehow. And no one could argue with that. One of the most convincing evidences for the reality of a changed life is, and we talked about this once a few years ago, I think, is the fact that the disciples, who were terrified, fearful men one minute, were willing to die the next minute before they would renounce what they believed. People would torture them and threaten them and punish them and jail them and beat them. But they couldn't recant because they knew what happened to them. And so let me share a little bit today what happened to me, okay? And I know I didn't say that stuff last time, so so for all you people that are getting the repeat, that was new, right? I grew up in a pew, basically. If I didn't know better, if I didn't know that my mother actually went to the hospital to give birth to me, I would bet I was born in the church. Because I was always there. My grandfather was the pastor of a tiny church in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. The Church of the Open Door. How's that for a name, right? My mom played the piano in church. My dad used to run the track ministry, and my grandfather preached, and I was always there. I was one of those kids, you know? The brats. The brats who know more about the Bible stories than the Sunday school teachers do, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I was
the brats who are always acting up, and they're smart mouth, and they're kind of, you know, and they're not, it's not that they're like delinquents or anything, they're kind of, you know, yeah, I got it all worked out, you know, yeah, you know who my grandpa is, right? That kind of thing, right? Good morning, JT. How are you, buddy? Good. So I was one of those kids. And I remember that very, very clearly. I remember Mrs. Hayworth. Oh my gosh, can you believe I just said that name? I'm looking at my mom right now. I mean, I remember being like 8 or 9 years old and being in Sunday school class with Mrs. Hayworth and her flannel graph board. For those of you, flannel graph, what is that? It's like prehistoric Velcro, okay? They would have these little figures, Bible characters, and they were fuzzy on the back. And then they would have a piece of felt stretched over a board. They would slap them on there, and they'd stick, just like Velcro. And I remember correcting the teacher when she would not remember the names of the characters, and the three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and I would be the little brat in the front row at 7 years old going, Abednego! And back then my name was Victor. I mean, it wasn't until high school that I started saying, I want to be called Vic. I like that better, because Victor sounds like a mischievous brat, I think. But anyway, they always used to report me, my grandfather, your grandson is acting up, or he's disruptive. Suffice to say, I was always in church. Always. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Right? You church people are like, midweek service, right? And then we even used to do an evangelistic evening, Thursday nights. We would get together at the church, and then we would go out to the local malls and stuff and pass out literature, right? So, I mean, always. And then when you have any youth events or anything like that on the weekends, dude, I'm always there. Always. I mean, like when I wrote my address down, it was the church address, as my home. Always there. And even when my grandfather decided to start a Christian school in our church, I was student number one. I was in the school there. And my mom was so eager to have me attend there. We lived 20 miles in the opposite direction of the church, and she would have to go that way 45 miles to work every day, and school was 25 miles the other way. So I actually lived with my grandparents when I went to the Christian school there, because I would drop right into the school with my grandfather. So here's me every day of the week now at our church in Christian school. Open Door Christian Academy. Da, da, da. We had our little ties with flags on them, You guys ever seen those? Yeah. It was a navy blue tie, and it had red and white stripes on it, and it had a Christian flag and a cross. Christian flag, cross. Christian flag, cross. And so I was doing the deal. Do you have the picture in your mind of a little skinny Victor? Always there. I have countless trophies from winning Bible memorization contests. We would have these contests and these events where in a week you see how many verses you can memorize. And I always won. I memorized 200 verses in a week, and both of them. King James, by the way. The hard stuff. Therefore thou shalt, that kind of stuff. Whithersoever. That was always a good one. But I want you to get the picture of this kid. He knew all of it. He had it all figured out. So one day I was 13 years old, and I was in school, in my Christian school. And on Wednesday afternoons at our school, we had a chapel service. And different people would speak, whether it might be my grandpa even, or it might be the youth pastor, or it might be one of the teachers, and they would give a little chapel service. So this particular day, John Ferguson was speaking. And he was speaking on a passage that I have right here on my iPhone, my iBible. My Bible. And I'm going to read it to you. Is that okay? Yeah. Oh, he's reading the Bible. I know, cool, right? Matthew 7. Now, I have become a big fan of a very contemporary translation called The Message. I grew up on the King James. And I think one thing that has happened over the years is especially with with this generation is, that King James stuff, you know what I mean? It just doesn't sound like the way we talk anymore. And it could be telling you something very powerful and very emotional, and it just falls flat because it doesn't sound like we hear things. So I'm going to read this to you first in the King James, and then I'm going to read it to you in the Message, okay? So you'll get a kick out of the difference in the translation, and I think you'll see how impactful it can be if it's in a translation, in using wording that we would use. Okay, ready? Here we go. Oh, by the way, this is Jesus talking. Okay? I don't mean me, I mean.
I know Jesus.
No, that's not what I mean. Matthew 7, starting with verse 21. You ready? Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? Have we not cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Got it? Here comes the Message version. This is so awesome. It really is. Ready? Knowing the correct password, saying, Master, Master, for instance, isn't going to get you anywhere with me. What is required is serious obedience, doing what my Father wills. I can see it now. Thousands strutting up at the final judgment and saying unto me, Master, we preached the message. We bashed the demons. Our God-sponsored projects had everyone talking. And do you know what I'm going to say? You missed the boat. All you did was use me to make yourselves important. You don't impress me one bit. You're out of here. Wow. Hear the difference? It's the same thing. It's just worded in a way that makes much more impactful sense in these days. So, John Ferguson spoke on that passage, and his whole lesson was centered around the idea of people that grew up in church, like me, and they memorized all the Bible verses, and parents served in the church, and they went to Christian school, and they had short hair, and they didn't listen to rock and roll music, and they didn't do this and that, they did this and that, and they met all the requirements, but they never made a decision for themselves to accept God's gift of salvation. They were, in effect, riding on the coattails of their family. With me? I'm Catholic because my parents were Catholic. How many people, when they fill out a form and it says religious affiliation, and they don't even have one, but they'll put down something because that's what their family is, right? Oh, my parents were Presbyterian. I put out Presbyterian. But ask them what the tenets of being a Presbyterian are, they wouldn't know. I mean, they don't really know. And so I had come to the belief that because my mom played the piano in church and my grandfather was the pastor, and I went to Christian school, and I memorized hundreds of Bible verses, and I knew the name of Abednego, that I was going to I was cool. I was in. And John Ferguson spoke about what a sad day it was going to be when people stood before God, just like me, and said, hey,